Good afternoon. In the inimitable words of Monty Python, and now for something completely different, but in keeping with the fireworks theme. It's a decided honor to be asked to address all of you, and I'm delighted to be here in such august company. When I was asked a few months ago if I would make these remarks, I was told, and I think I'm quoting what I was told twice, that we really want to hear your honest thoughts and you should say exactly what you think. That's all the people who know me who are laughing. And when I told my daughter this just before coming down here, she looked at me in amazement and said, "Don't these people know you? Are they just masochists?" The approbation of our children really enriches our later years. I've been deliberately provocative in my title, and yes, I am going to have some slides to keep my image off the Jumbotron. Because we are about strategy at National Art Strategies. I want to start by looking at the definition of crisis. Yesterday, I think Ben made a reference about Latin, so I have to go back a little farther than that, but we'll start with Mr. Webster. The definitions of crisis, the turning point for better or for worse, the decisive moment, a situation that's reached a critical phase. And given that this is such an erudite crowd, let's go back to the Greek, crisis, which means decision. So it is decision time for all of us. There's no question that we're facing a turning point and a decisive moment. And what I want to do in the next few minutes is to talk about where I think we have a genuine crisis or moment of decision and how we got here. And then I'm going to try and redeem myself by talking a little bit about what we might do next. By the end of this talk, we do a lot of statistical analysis at NAS, so by the end of this talk, I've estimated, and it'll be interesting to see if I've got this right, that about 25% of you will be angry with me, 30% of you are going to agree with me but not like it, and about 10% of you are going to be depressed. So I'm sorry about the 10%. So I'm going to apologize in advance, and I'm just going to ask that the remaining 35% see me to safety when this is over. We work in the most wonderful of fields, the making of meaning and the making of music. But we have built a delivery structure that is clearly, in its current scope, scale, and entirety, not sustainable. For the arts generally, we are experiencing a crisis of legitimacy, as John Holden refers to it, and it has been a very long time in coming. Legitimacy is bestowed or conferred or awarded. It's not simply appropriated. Some aspects of what we're experiencing are factors that are beyond our control. Changing educational systems, we've heard a lot about these in the course of the conference. I'm sure that the Chorus America conference has had many similar themes. Changing educational systems, significant changes in consumer behaviors, an extraordinary period of disintermediation thanks to technological advancement, and a major and historical shift in the centers of wealth creation from the West to the East. A friend of mine, Linda Crompton, who's the president of BoardSource, often wonders if, at the end of the Middle Ages, did someone walk around with a loudspeaker saying, "Please pay attention, the feudal system is about to go out of fashion." I suspect not, but we're in the middle of that kind of tectonic shift, and it's very difficult when you're in the center of something that is so profoundly altering to the environment to see just what a moment this is. Now, what we're experiencing is not unique. I want to thank Phil, who I think bolted, for saying, there are lots of businesses that are having difficulties right now. And for those of you who are waiting to see the part that'll make you cross, here's your heads up. This is it. We aren't unique. This is a statement that was made by someone who knows a lot about the chemicals industry. I love the idea of excess optimism. I imagine chemists have a very specific formula of the amount of optimism that that needs to be measured out. Let's talk about the banking industry for a minute. This is a moment of profound change. And you'll see that in the banking industry, based on this information, and this is just a sample of the kind of thinking that's going on throughout the banking industry, is that they need to shift from acquiring new customers at all costs to building deeper relationships. But just because these things are out of our control, it doesn't mean that these changes were unforeseeable. At the start of my career 30 years ago, I became really fascinated with how businesses go out of business. Now, that probably makes me a little bit morbid, but, and I began to read up on corporate and nonprofit history to form my own version of Belloc's cautionary tales. Now, those of you who have read Jim Collins' most recent book on how the mighty fall will know the names of many of these businesses: Motorola, A&P, Zenith. That's just naming a few of the more recent ones. My research methodology over the past 30 years would be no threat to Jim Collins, but I was interested in a simple analysis of what behaviors rather than characteristics, and he covers the characteristics very, very well in his most recent book, were coincidental with failure. What seeds do we actually need to sow for our own Greek tragedy? So times are hard. And your jobs are very, very difficult. Let's just end the madness. Let's make it happen faster. And now, in the tradition of Jonathan Swift and A Modest Proposal, if you don't know that reference, please find someone in the audience over the age of 50 who has a liberal arts education. They can explain it to you. Here is my formula for how to be sure that you can go out of business quickly and pretty painlessly. My taxonomy is going to include internal to the organization behaviors and acts, and then externally visible behaviors and attitudes. Starting internally, here's the first magic bullet on a bad day you've all been looking for. This is very important. It removes flexibility, and it makes managing during required periods of contraction very difficult. Now, this one is a little more nuanced, but just bear with me here. With real effort, this can become so seamlessly integrated into your thinking that you don't even notice you're doing it. The two things are related, core values and core competencies, and they should be congruent in some ways. But if you really want to endanger your business, you need to conflate the two of them. For example, the degree of excellence that you want for your individual performances can lead you to decide that the only way to achieve this is to own and control an acoustically perfect performing space. You can then ignore the fact that with a large and expensive building, in order to be sustainable, one of your predominant core competencies should be competitive retail space management. This suggests that you use the building for the maximum required financial return, even if it means that you aren't the organization performing for the majority of nights. I like this one too. This is a good one. It's particularly appropriate for the nonprofit sector. Growth has additional expense implications in our world because we're inherently loss-making structures. That's not a value judgment, it's just a fact of the way that we're constructed. Left to their own devices, our balance sheets and financial positions will erode even at steady state activity. So if we grow without identifying secure, continual, balancing income to match that growth, we create a larger problem faster. If you lose money on every transaction, volume is never your answer. You can hear it. Yeah, they're getting it. Okay. When thinking about growth, it'll be particularly useful to you if you ignore what Adrian Ellis recently wrote in the Art newspaper when he noted, and I'm quoting, "We live increasingly in a virtual age, in an age where the weightless, the mobile, the contingent, the adaptive, the provisional, and the collaborative are far more compelling than their antonyms. You'll want to focus instead on bigger, heavier, costlier, and more solitary." Now, growth could mean numbers of people served, growth in impact, growth in artistic excellence, but narrowing the definition to just getting bigger is the most helpful thing you can do if you want to leave the field. Now, the easiest way to achieve this one is to just not have any data, okay? That works. It works. And actually, we've done pretty well on this for quite a long time. You don't want to look at consumer trends or educational figures that give you a glimpse of your future audiences or demographic data that might influence your program or your communications. Now, if you are saddled with inconvenient facts and numbers, if you've got some upstart younger person in your organization or a board member that insists on bringing a view from the outside world, you need to perfect the art of not using it for decision-making if it says something that you don't like. I don't know if you can see this in the back, but it says we need a dashboard application to track your key metrics. Second, that way you'll have more data to ignore when you make your decisions based on company politics. And then he says, will the data be accurate? And then the dog says, well, okay, let's pretend that that matters. You want to skip over articles that appear to have little to do with our field because a second glance runs the risk of making them seem more relevant. The May 20th reference in the Journal of Advertising Research that points out, it's a longitudinal research project that's been going for 30-some years, that our social values have changed dramatically over the past 3 decades, and that for the first time since this research began, self-respect surged in importance, and a sense of belonging and assimilation became less important. That is no longer the #1 motivator. This kind of information should never raise a question for you of how we promote group experiences to a society that values group experience less than their own opinion. And you should particularly not waste time thinking about what we have to do to reverse this trend for the benefit of civil society as a whole. Frankly, it's a waste of time for you to be worried about that if you're trying to go out of business. You need to ignore the work of Dr. Libby Larson, who spoke at Chorus America's annual conference a few years back and demonstrated the link between transportation advances, mobility, and our involvement with music in all of its forms. This irritatingly insightful research would only make you ponder further, as many of you I know already do, and you need to stop it. Tiresome decisions about the broader social context for how we deliver our product, our concerts, our performances. That every aspect of American life since our founding, from work to politics to wealth creation to religion to entertainment, is defined by our modes of transportation and by our unique and solitary mobility as a society should be of no concern to you. Now, I want to be clear about what I mean here. I'm not suggesting that we bring back indentured servitude, tempting though it may be, or that your people are not your most important resource. I am not suggesting that you mistreat or underpay or exploit. You can go out of business just as fast and with far more justice for being a terrible employer than you can by being unrealistic about how and what you can afford to pay people. And not investing in the well-being and ongoing development of all employees is just bad business. But if you create more value for employees than for customers, your financial structure needs to take into account that you're not creating sufficient value for financial and participation reward from the market, and you should limit the scope of your work accordingly, or not, if you want to accelerate the process of exiting the field. This is a good one, too. This, by the way, is an ancient art. Socrates deplored writing because it would weaken the memories of young people. That was a technology. You would do well to embrace this concern. Any of you who've ever heard Andrew Taylor speak or who read Slate know that Conrad Gessner died in 1565, and he was writing about the advent of the Gutenberg press. For our own times, ignoring the tectonic shift that technology has provided in the form of portable, self-curated culture will go a long way toward accelerating your exit stage left. This is a major sociological change we're experiencing, not the age of gadgets. Clay Shirky reminds us that the commonplace nature of technology today means that a great deal of our institutional advantage has been eroded. Individuals have the tools to organize, to make art, to participate in art, and to find art without our help. Ben was talking yesterday about 14-year-olds who are on their second and third film. The technology options of today have created a world of continuous partial attention, in the words of Linda Stone, a leading thinker on attention, health, and technology, and not thinking about what this epidemic of continuous partial attention might mean as we present long-form artistic work is very helpful in our quest to wind down your businesses. And fearing technology, by the way, gives you a double benefit because you can diminish the role and position of your organization relative to your market and not know you did it until it's too late, but you can also say you were just being Socratic while you're doing it. Now this one's a winner, it's tried and true. In addition to running out of cash if you have no reserves for a peaks and troughs business, not managing liquidity is a really terrific way to sap your energy as a leader and innovator and to draw your attention away from how you're creating value and maintaining standards. It really is a winner for closing you down, and if not that, just wearing you out. Now let's look at the external behaviors that you need to embrace. This is actually my favorite one. By believing that your customer isn't smart enough, patient enough, interested enough, educated enough, or even in extreme cases, grateful enough, you can shrink your market very effectively. All of these things may be true, but markets do not care. By this measure, and I'm sorry to single some people out to be critical of your work, but by this measure, I greatly fear that organizations such as St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, Vocal Essence, the Memphis, a great many more of you in this room may be in business for a long time, and you need to stop this strategic development of enriching relationships and focus on short-term gain. This is a good one. This is particularly useful for resource-strained organizations. Competing uses up more of your unique resource than collaborating over long periods of time with like-minded organizations who may provide a complementary value in the market. This joint gathering is really a very bad example for all of you. You want to avoid collaboration at all costs. This is another one we've heard reference to. The Pro-Am revolution is Charles Ledbetter's term for the fundamental shift in cultural consumption over the past 2 decades. Bill Ivey and Stephen Tepper have written very compellingly about it under the rubric of participation, and there's a lot of writing out there on the topic of how a world that embraces voting people off the island, virtual activity games, and active retirement is not as passive as audiences may have been in times gone by. Ignore this literature. And finally, if you feel pretty comfortable and generally ticking along with business as usual, then you probably are not being particularly innovative and you're making very good progress toward closure. Innovation does not mean that you reinvent or recreate something new every 10 minutes. It means that you're actually able to incorporate new ideas into your business practice at levels small and large, and you should avoid this type of activity whenever you can. Now, what if you decided that in fact you didn't want to go away? Because I suspect that most of you in this room really don't, and that you have no intention of taking my Swiftian advice. I suspect that many of you believe that in a world that any of us really want to live in, not all value is created in markets, and that we in the arts actually have an essential role to play in advancing society and developing economies of meaning rather than just economies of money. What if, after hearing all of this, with all my efforts to get you to see the light, you are still determined to find a way to move out of crisis thinking and get down to the serious work of imagining the future as a place where your work matters because you're planting the seeds of future audiences in kindergartens everywhere. If you have already accepted the hard fact that the public school system is no longer engaged in audience development for the work of the arts, and that you need to reach into the schools and the after-school programs and the park services and anywhere else where there is a silence you can fill with music, because you plan to build institutions of value for the next generation and the next and the next. What if you decide you're determined to create a world where this guy is dead wrong, and that building that world may take a generation, but that you are going to take personal responsibility for seeing that we get there? And what if you decide that this man is right? What if you've already embraced the idea that arts organizations can no longer just be about something, they have to be for somebody, a lot of somebodies. And you're going to make your organization an indispensable part of your community, even if it means that you have to take the component pieces of it and rearrange them and refit them and redefine them until you are indispensable to how your community, large or small, sees itself and celebrates itself. What if you already know that building communities is part of our work? And a community isn't just an audience. A community talks back, and it criticizes, and it challenges, and it questions, and it reshapes our organizations to fit its needs, or it walks away if we will not listen. And what if each of you, collectively and individually, have decided that our most pervasive and enduring legitimacy in the arts will come from the creation of relationships, not from the amassing of audiences? If you've decided that despite the fact that this is hard work, this is the most important work you can be doing, that the need for beauty and reflection and coming together to experience music and finding joy in music when we are alone will never go away, and if the institutions we have built don't meet that need, then we just have to rebuild them. If despite the economic and social uncertainties that we face right now, you have decided that C.S. Lewis was right when he told his students on the eve of World War II, human life has always been lived on the edge of a precipice. Human culture has always had to exist under the shadow of something infinitely more important than itself. If men had postponed the search for knowledge and beauty until they were secure, the search would never have begun. Now we have to allow him the men instead of men and women because he was writing a while ago. If you choose these paths in this time of crisis, as the Greeks understood the word crisis, if you make this a time of tough but intelligent decisions, rather than a time of feeling victimized by circumstance and buffeted by ill fortune, well, then I'm very much afraid that your organizations are going to be around in American life for a very, very long time, maybe even in one form or another forever. Thank you.